The Silent Killer. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The town of Marlow had always been a quiet place. Nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, it was a community where everyone knew each other's business, and nothing much ever happened. The biggest news in recent memory was the retirement of Sheriff Hank Brody, who had served the town for over 30 years. His replacement, Sheriff Elizabeth Carter, the haunted forest, was still finding her footing in the close-knit community. Sheriff Carter was an outsider, having transferred from the bustling city of Philadelphia. She was in her mid-30s, with a determined look in her green eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Marlow had seemed like a peaceful respite from the chaos of city policing, a place where she could finally catch her breath. But all that changed the day Jack Reacher walked into town. Reacher, a former military police major, was a man who preferred to travel light. He had no fixed address, no car, and no luggage, just the clothes on his back and a folding toothbrush in his pocket. His height and imposing build made him hard to miss, and his arrival in Marlow did not go unnoticed. Reacher had been on the road for weeks, hitchhiking his way across the country, enjoying the freedom of the open road. But as he approached Marlow, he felt a strange pull, an instinct that told him to stop. He hadn't planned to stay, but something about the town felt off. His instincts rarely led him astray, and he decided to heed the feeling. The first thing Reacher did was head to the local diner. It was a small place with a retro vibe, complete with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, and heads turned. Reacher scanned the room, taking in the curious stares and the nervous energy. He sat at the counter and ordered a black coffee from the waitress, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a forced smile. Her name tag read Maggie. As she poured his coffee, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremble in her hands. "Been a long day?" Reacher asked, his voice a low rumble. Maggie glanced around before leaning in closer. "You could say that. There's something not right in this town." Reacher raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Maggie hesitated, then shook her head. "I shouldn't be talking about it. Just be careful, okay?" Reacher nodded, sipping his coffee. He had seen that look before, in places where fear hung in the air like a dense fog. Whatever was going on in Marlow, it was serious enough to put the residents on edge. And if there was one thing Reacher couldn't resist, it was a mystery. As he left the diner, Reacher spotted Sheriff Carter across the street. She was talking to an elderly man who looked distraught. Reacher crossed the street and approached them, his curiosity piqued. "Everything okay here?" he asked. Sheriff Carter turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "Jack Reacher," he said, extending a hand. "Just passing through." "Sheriff Elizabeth Carter," she replied, shaking his hand. "And this is Mr. Thompson. His daughter, Emily, has gone missing." Reacher looked at the old man, noting the worry etched into his weathered face. "How long has she been gone?" "2 days," Mr. Thompson said, his voice trembling. "She went out for a walk and never came back." Reacher glanced at Sheriff Carter. "Do you have any leads?" "We're working on it," she said, her tone defensive. "But we could use all the help we can get." Reacher nodded. "I'm not a cop anymore, but I can look around, ask some questions." Sheriff Carter studied him for a moment before nodding. "I won't turn down any help. Just be careful. There's something strange going on in this town." Reacher nodded and turned to leave, his mind already working through the possibilities. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. Chapter 2. The Unseen Threat. Reacher started his investigation at the last place Emily Thompson had been seen, the edge of the woods on the outskirts of town. The dense forest loomed like a dark, silent sentinel, its thick canopy casting deep shadows over the ground. It was easy to see how someone could get lost in there, but Reacher suspected there was more to Emily's disappearance than a simple accident. He moved quietly through the trees, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under his boots. As he ventured deeper into the woods, he noticed subtle signs of disturbance. Broken branches, footprints half erased by the elements. Someone had been here recently. Reacher's keen eyes followed the trail until it led to a small clearing. There, he found something that made his blood run cold. A piece of fabric, torn and stained with what looked like blood. He crouched down, examining it closely. It matched the description of the dress Emily had been wearing when she disappeared. His mind raced with possibilities. Had Emily been attacked? Was she still alive? Reacher's instincts told him to keep moving, to find more clues before the trail went cold. He pocketed the fabric and continued through the woods, his senses sharp and his mind focused. As he neared the edge of the forest, Reacher heard a rustling sound. He froze, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer. Someone or something was watching him. He turned slowly, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched lingered, sending a chill down his spine. Reacher emerged from the woods and made his way back to town. He headed straight for the sheriff's office, determined to share his findings with Sheriff Carter. She needed to know what he had discovered, and they needed to act fast if they had any hope of finding Emily alive. Sheriff Carter was at her desk, poring over maps and notes when Reacher walked in. She looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and relief. "Find anything?" she asked. Reacher pulled the piece of fabric from his pocket and handed it to her. "Found this in the woods. Looks like blood." Carter's face paled as she examined the fabric. "This is Emily's dress. We need to get a search team out there immediately." Reacher nodded. "There's more. Someone was watching me in the woods. We might be dealing with more than just a missing person." Carter's jaw tightened. "You think she was taken?" "It's possible," Reacher said. "And if that's the case, we're running out of time." Carter grabbed her radio and called for backup. Within minutes, a team of deputies was assembled, ready to search the woods. Reacher joined them, his mind racing with questions. Who had taken Emily and why? And what else were they hiding? As the search team spread out through the forest, Reacher felt that same eerie sensation of being watched. He knew they were getting close, but he also knew that whoever was responsible for Emily's disappearance wouldn't go down without a fight. The hunt was on, and Reacher was determined to see it through to the end. The search continued for hours, with no sign of Emily or her captor. Just as hope began to fade, a deputy's voice crackled over the radio. "We found something. You'd better come see this." Reacher and Carter rushed to the deputy's location. They found him standing in front of a small, hidden cabin, its windows boarded up and its door padlocked. The cabin looked abandoned, but Reacher's instincts told him otherwise. Carter motioned for silence as they approached the cabin. Reacher's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared to confront whatever lay inside. The tension was palpable, and the stakes had never been higher. With a swift kick, Reacher broke the padlock and pushed the door open. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Chapter 3: The Hidden Prison. The cabin's interior was dimly lit, with only a few narrow beams of sunlight piercing through the boarded-up windows. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mold and decay was overpowering. Reacher's eyes quickly adjusted to the gloom, and he took in the scene before him with grim determination. The small room was sparsely furnished, with a single wooden chair and a table covered in various tools and scraps of paper. But what caught Reacher's attention was the trapdoor in the corner, partially concealed by an old, threadbare rug. He glanced at Sheriff Carter, who nodded, her face set in a hard mask of resolve. Reacher moved to the trapdoor and lifted it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and dank, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of human misery. He gestured for the deputies to follow and began his descent, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. The basement was even darker than the cabin above, but Reacher's eyes soon adjusted. He saw a small, makeshift cell in one corner, its door fashioned from heavy metal bars. Inside, huddled on a dirty mattress, was Emily Thompson. Her clothes were torn, and she looked weak and frightened, but she was alive. "Emily," Reacher said softly, approaching the cell. "We're here to get you out." Emily looked up, her eyes wide with relief and fear. "Please, get me out of here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sheriff Carter quickly found the key hanging on a nail near the door and unlocked the cell. Reacher helped Emily to her feet, supporting her as they made their way back up the stairs. The fresh air outside seemed to revive her a little, and she clung to Reacher as they emerged from the cabin. The deputies called for an ambulance, and Emily was soon on her way to the hospital. Reacher and Carter watched as the ambulance sped away, both of them relieved but also deeply troubled. The discovery of the cabin raised more questions than it answered. "Who would do this?" Carter asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reacher shook his head. "Someone who knows the woods well. Someone who can hide in plain sight." Carter frowned. "We need to find out who else knew about this cabin, and we need to find them fast." Reacher agreed. "I'll start asking around. Someone in this town knows more than they're letting on." As Reacher made his way back to the diner, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were up against something far more sinister than a simple kidnapping. The clues pointed to a deeper, darker mystery, one that threatened not just Emily, but the entire town of Marlowe. Chapter 4. The Web of Secrets. Back at the diner, the atmosphere was tense. The news of Emily's rescue had spread quickly, and the regulars were buzzing with speculation. Reacher took a seat at the counter, and Maggie hurried over, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Is she okay?" Maggie asked, her voice a hushed whisper. "She's safe now," Reacher replied. "But we need to find out who did this." Maggie glanced around, then leaned in closer. "There have been rumors, people disappearing, strange noises in the woods, but no one talks about it openly. They're too scared." Reacher's eyes narrowed. "Who do you think is behind this?" Maggie hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know for sure, but there's an old man, lives on the edge of town. Jacob Miller. People say he's a bit odd, keeps to himself, but he's been around a long time. Knows these woods better than anyone." Reacher nodded. "Where can I find him?" Maggie gave him directions to Jacob Miller's house, and Reacher set off immediately. The house was a ramshackle old place, barely visible through the overgrown foliage that surrounded it. As Reacher approached, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something undeniably eerie about the place. He knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it creaked open to reveal an old man with wild, unkempt hair and piercing blue eyes. Jacob Miller looked at Reacher with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Can I help you?" Miller asked, his voice rough and gravelly. "Name's Jack Reacher," he said. "I'm looking into the disappearance of Emily Thompson." Miller's eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. "I heard about that terrible thing. She was found in a cabin in the woods," Reacher continued. "I was wondering if you knew anything about it." Miller's gaze hardened. "I mind my own business, Mr. Reacher, and I suggest you do the same." Reacher didn't back down. "People are scared, Mr. Miller. They think there's something dangerous out there. If you know anything, now's the time to speak up." Miller's expression softened slightly, and he sighed. "The woods have always been full of secrets. I've seen things, heard things, but talking about it won't change anything. It might just make things worse." Reacher leaned in, his voice low and steady. "Whatever's happening out there, it's not going to stop on its own. We need to put an end to it." Miller looked into Reacher's eyes for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's an old legend about a spirit that haunts these woods. They call it the Silent Killer. People say it takes those who wander too far, never to be seen again." Reacher's mind raced. A legend could be used to cover up real crimes, to keep people silent through fear. Do you believe in it? Miller shrugged. Belief's got nothing to do with it. But I've seen enough to know there's something out there. Something that doesn't want to be found. Reacher nodded. Thank you for your time. As he left Miller's house, Reacher couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The silent killer might be a legend, but the fear it inspired was real. And someone was using that fear to their advantage. Reacher's next stop was the sheriff's office. He needed to share what he'd learned with Carter and figure out their next move. The clock was ticking, and he knew that if they didn't act fast, the silent killer would strike again. Chapter 5. The Heart of Darkness. Reacher and Sheriff Carter stood in her office, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a physical force. Carter had spread out a map of Marlowe and the surrounding woods on her desk, marking the locations of recent disappearances and other strange occurrences. This is where we found Emily, Carter said, pointing to a spot on the map. And these are the locations of the other disappearances over the past few years. They form a pattern, all centered around this area here. Reacher leaned over the map, studying the marked locations. It looks like they're circling something. What's in the center? Carter hesitated, then pointed to a large, unmarked area on the map. That's Miller's property. His house is here, and the cabin where we found Emily is over here. But most of his land is dense forest, almost impenetrable. Reacher nodded. Makes sense. If someone wanted to hide something or someone, that would be the place to do it. Carter frowned. But why would Miller be involved? He seemed genuinely afraid when you talked to him. Reacher thought for a moment. Maybe he's not involved willingly, or maybe he knows more than he's letting on. Either way, we need to get in there and see for ourselves. Carter nodded. I'll get a warrant and assemble a team. We'll go in at first light. Reacher agreed. I'll be there. The next morning, Reacher met Carter and her team at the edge of Miller's property. The air was crisp and cold, and the sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Reacher felt a sense of anticipation, mixed with a growing sense of unease. They moved quietly through the woods, the dense underbrush making progress slow and difficult. Reacher took the lead, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The woods seemed to close in around them, the trees forming a dark, oppressive canopy overhead. After what felt like hours, they reached the center of Miller's property. There, hidden among the trees, was a small clearing with an old, dilapidated building at its center. The building looked like it had been abandoned for years, but Reacher's instincts told him otherwise. This is it, Reacher said quietly. This is where we'll find our answers. Carter signaled for her team to spread out and surround the building. Reacher and Carter approached the front door, weapons at the ready. Reacher could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he reached for the door handle. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Reacher stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The building was filled with old furniture, broken and covered in dust. But there was something else, a faint sound, like the rustling of leaves or the whispering of voices. Reacher followed the sound to a trapdoor in the floor. He motioned for Carter to cover him as he lifted the door, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The same sense of dread he had felt before washed over him, but he pushed it aside and descended the stairs. The basement was even darker and colder than the one in the cabin. Reacher's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a series of cells similar to the one where Emily had been held. But these cells were empty, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. In the center of the room was a large table covered in papers and maps. Reacher approached it, scanning the documents for any clues. What he found made his blood run cold. The papers detailed a series of experiments conducted on unwilling subjects. The notes spoke of psychological manipulation, of creating fear and obedience through isolation and deprivation. The silent killer was not a legend, it was a method, a way to control and terrorize. "Reacher, over here," Carter called, her voice tense. Reacher turned to see Carter standing by another door, this one heavily reinforced. He joined her, and together they forced the door open. Inside was a small, cramped room filled with surveillance equipment. Monitors displayed live feeds from cameras hidden throughout the woods and the town. "Someone's been watching us," Carter said, her voice filled with horror. Reacher nodded, his mind racing. "And not just watching, they're orchestrating this whole thing, using fear to control the town, to keep everyone in line." Carter looked at Reacher, her eyes wide with realization. But who? Who would do something like this? Reacher's mind flashed back to his conversation with Miller. The old man's fear, his warnings about the silent killer. It all made sense now. Miller's not the one behind this. He's a pawn just like the rest of the town. We need to find out who's really pulling the strings. As they left the basement, Reacher's resolve hardened. They were getting closer to the truth, but the real enemy was still out there, hidden in the shadows. And Reacher knew that they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Chapter 6. The final confrontation. The team regrouped outside the building, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Reacher and Carter shared a look of determination. They had uncovered the heart of the operation, but now they needed to find the mastermind. "We need to bring Miller in for questioning," Carter said. "He might know more than he's letting on." Reacher agreed. "And we need to be ready for anything. Whoever's behind this will do whatever it takes to protect themselves." They moved quickly, heading back to Miller's house. The old man was in his yard, tending to a small vegetable garden. He looked up as they approached, a mixture of surprise and resignation in his eyes. "We need to talk, Mr. Miller," Carter said, her voice firm. Miller nodded slowly. "I figured you'd be back. Come inside." They followed Miller into his house, taking seats around his small kitchen table. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken questions. "We found your cabin," Reacher said, watching Miller's reaction closely. "And the basement, the experiments." Miller's face paled. "I knew they'd find out eventually. I tried to warn you." "Warn us about what?" Carter asked. Miller sighed heavily. "About the people I work for. They call themselves the Council. They control everything in this town. They keep the fear alive to keep people in line." Reacher's mind raced. "Who are they?" Miller shook his head. "I don't know their real names. They wear masks, speak through intermediaries. But they're powerful, connected. And they won't stop until they have total control." Carter leaned forward. "How do we find them?" Miller hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. "This is all I have. A list of addresses, places where they meet. It's not much, but it's a start." Reacher took the paper, scanning the list. "It's enough. We'll take it from here." As they left Miller's house, Reacher's mind was already working through their next steps. They had a lead, but it would be dangerous. The Council was clearly willing to go to great lengths to protect their secrets, and Reacher knew they would be prepared for any threat. Back at the sheriff's office, they assembled a team and planned their approach. They would hit the addresses on the list simultaneously, hoping to catch the Council off guard. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot. The operation began at dusk. Reacher led one team while Carter led another. They moved quickly and quietly, securing each location with precision. At the final address, they found what they had been looking for: a hidden room filled with documents, computers, and surveillance equipment. Reacher and Carter moved through the room, gathering evidence. It was clear that the Council had been running their operation for years, using fear and manipulation to control the town. But there was still one piece missing: the identity of the Council members. As they searched, Reacher found a locked drawer. He forced it open, revealing a set of files. Each file contained detailed information on the Council members: including their real names and roles in the organization. "We've got them," Reacher said, handing the files to Carter. Carter's eyes widened as she read the names. "These are some of the most respected people in town. This is going to rock the community to its core." Reacher nodded. "But it's the only way to stop them." They moved quickly, arresting the council members and securing the evidence. The town of Marlowe would never be the same, but it would be free from the shadow of fear that had hung over it for so long. As the sun rose over the town, Reacher stood with Carter, watching as the last of the council members were taken away in handcuffs. It had been a long, difficult journey, but they had finally brought the truth to light. "Thank you, Reacher," Carter said quietly. "We couldn't have done this without you." Reacher nodded. "Just doing my part. Take care of this town, Sheriff." With that, Reacher turned and walked away, ready to move on to the next town, the next mystery. The road ahead was uncertain, but Reacher knew he would face whatever came his way with the same determination and resolve. The end. The Haunted Forest. Chapter 1. Echoes in the Forest. Willows Creek had always been a quiet town, nestled comfortably in the valley between rolling hills. Its residents cherished the peace that came with small-town life, but the tranquility of the community was overshadowed by the presence of the haunted forest. The forest, an ancient and sprawling expanse of gnarled trees and shadowy undergrowth, had long been a source of unease and mystery. Emily Carter, a 15-year-old with a thirst for adventure, had grown up hearing stories about the forest's eerie occurrences. Her grandmother, a woman known for her vivid imagination and knack for storytelling, spun tales of ghostly figures, inexplicable disappearances, and whispers carried on the wind. While Emily had initially dismissed these stories as mere superstition, the unsettling atmosphere of the forest had always piqued her curiosity. On a crisp autumn evening, the fog rolled in thick and heavy, obscuring the edges of the town and casting an ethereal glow over the streets. Emily decided it was the perfect night to confront the enigma of the haunted forest. Armed with a flashlight, a notebook, and a heart full of courage, she stepped into the dense mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. As she walked toward the forest, the familiar sounds of the town, laughter, the distant hum of traffic, gradually faded away, replaced by an almost oppressive silence. The fog grew denser, wrapping around her like a cold embrace. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the occasional rustling of branches. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dark canopy. Emily's flashlight cut through the gloom, casting elongated shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The forest felt alive, as if it were watching her every move. After walking for what felt like hours, Emily stumbled upon an old cabin. Its appearance was almost as unsettling as the forest itself. The cabin was weathered and dilapidated, its wooden planks rotting and sagging under the weight of years. The windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar, creaking gently in the breeze. Despite the growing sense of unease, Emily felt an irresistible pull toward the cabin. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The hinges groaned in protest, and the cabin's interior was revealed. A dark, musty space filled with cobwebs and dust. The air inside was heavy with the scent of decay. Emily's flashlight revealed a cluttered room filled with old furniture, broken remnants of a once-lived-in space. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and an old, ornate mirror stood in the corner, its surface grimy and cracked. As she approached the mirror, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The mirror's reflection was distorted, the image appearing warped and unsettling. She could see her own reflection, but the shadows around her seemed to move independently of her own actions. A sudden chill swept through the room, causing Emily to shiver. The fog outside seemed to seep into the cabin, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Her breath misted in front of her as she stared into the mirror, her reflection growing increasingly distorted. Just then, Emily noticed a shadowy figure behind her reflection. Her heart skipped a beat, and she spun around, but the room was empty. Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the room. The figure in the mirror was now closer, its features obscured by darkness. A soft whisper filled the room, barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. It was a disembodied voice, distorted and hollow, uttering words she couldn't quite make out. Panic surged within her, and she turned back to the mirror. The shadowy figure seemed to reach out toward her, its hand stretching across the fractured glass. Desperate to escape, Emily turned to the door, only to find it creaking shut with a sudden, almost deliberate slam. She was trapped. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a chorus of disjointed voices merging into one. The shadows around her seemed to close in, their darkness oppressive and suffocating. Emily's flashlight flickered one last time before going out, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The whispering grew louder, filling her ears with an unbearable cacophony. With a burst of adrenaline, Emily lunged at the door, throwing her weight against it. The door splintered and gave way with a crash, and she stumbled out into the fog. The forest enveloped her once more, the mist wrapping around her like a cold, clammy blanket. Emily fled through the forest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The shadows seemed to chase her, the whispering voices echoing in her mind. When she finally emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn was breaking through the mist. The haunted forest loomed behind her, its secrets still hidden in the darkness. As Emily looked back, she couldn't shake the feeling that something from the forest had followed her back into the light. The shadows and whispers had left an indelible mark on her soul, and she knew that her encounter with the haunted forest was far from over. Chapter 2. The Return to Darkness. Emily Carter's heart raced as she lay in bed, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The fog had rolled out of the forest but seemed to linger in her thoughts, a persistent reminder of the horrors she had encountered. The next day, as the sun shone brightly over Willow's Creek, Emily's parents were concerned about her pale face and the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. She had tried to explain her adventure, but the words seemed inadequate, the terror of the forest too profound to articulate. "You look like you've seen a ghost," her mother said with a worried frown. "Maybe you should stay home from school today." Emily shook her head. "I'm fine, really. Just tired." She couldn't bear the thought of discussing the forest or the cabin with anyone, especially her parents. They had enough to worry about without adding her fears to their list. The day dragged on, and the familiar hum of school felt like a distant echo compared to the dark silence of the forest. Emily's friends noticed her distracted demeanor, but she brushed off their concerns with half-hearted explanations. The whispers from the cabin haunted her, filling the empty spaces of her mind with their insidious murmurings. That evening, Emily sat at her desk, the eerie events of the previous night weighing heavily on her. The cabin's mirror, the shadowy figure, and the whispering voices replayed in her mind like a broken record. She decided to return to the forest, hoping to confront whatever malevolent force resided there. Her decision was fueled by a combination of curiosity and dread. She needed answers, an explanation for the horrors she had witnessed. Gathering her courage, Emily packed a small bag with essentials: a flashlight, a notebook, and a bottle of water. She was determined to face her fears head-on, even if it meant plunging back into the heart of darkness. As dusk approached, the sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness of the forest. Emily walked to the edge of town, her path illuminated by the waning light. The familiar chill in the air signaled the return of the fog, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. Entering the forest again, Emily felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. The mist wrapped around her, its cold fingers reaching into her bones. The shadows seemed more pronounced, the trees standing like silent guardians of the secrets within. This time, Emily decided to approach the cabin from a different angle, hoping to uncover more about its history. The cabin's silhouette loomed ahead, and as she drew nearer, she noticed something new. A faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from the broken windows. Her flashlight flickered on, casting a pale beam that cut through the fog. The light revealed the cabin in its eerie state, but the glow from within seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Emily hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. The cabin was, as she remembered, dusty and filled with remnants of a bygone era. The old mirror still stood in the corner, its cracked surface reflecting the dim light. Emily approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The glow was more pronounced now, emanating from the mirror itself. As she reached out to touch the glass, the temperature in the room plummeted. Emily's breath turned to mist, and a sense of foreboding settled over her. The mirror's surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, and the shadowy figure from before reappeared, its presence more palpable than ever. The figure seemed to reach out toward her, its hands stretching through the mirror as if trying to escape its prison. Emily's pulse quickened, and she took a step back, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The whispering voices returned, louder and more insistent, their words melding into a cacophony of dissonant sounds. "Help me find the truth." The voice was clearer now, and Emily could make out the words despite their hollow, distorted quality. It was a plea, a desperate cry for help that resonated deep within her. Determined to uncover the source of the voices, Emily searched the cabin for clues. Her flashlight beam revealed a collection of old newspapers scattered across a dusty table. The headlines spoke of strange occurrences in Willow's Creek: disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and mysterious deaths. One article caught her eye: the vanishing of the Carter family, a tragic mystery. The article detailed the disappearance of her great-grandparents, who had vanished without a trace decades ago. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she read about their last known location, the very cabin she was standing in. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. The whispers, the shadowy figure, they were connected to her family's tragic past. Emily's hands trembled as she continued to read, piecing together the fragments of the story. The forest had always been a place of darkness, but now it seemed to hold a personal connection to her family's history. As Emily pondered this revelation, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. The shadowy figure in the mirror moved closer, its form becoming more defined. Emily felt a cold, icy hand brush against her cheek, and she spun around, but the room was empty. Fear clawed at her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to find out more, to uncover the truth behind the forest's haunting presence. She carefully studied the old newspapers, hoping they would provide answers. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the cabin, and Emily jumped, her heart racing. The source of the noise was the mirror, which had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The glow from within the fragments cast eerie, shifting patterns on the walls. Emily's flashlight flickered, and the cabin was plunged into darkness once more. She fumbled to turn it back on, her hands shaking with fear. When the light finally flickered back to life, the cabin was empty. The oppressive silence was deafening, broken only by her ragged breaths. Determined to unravel the mystery, Emily resolved to investigate further. She knew that the answers lay within the depths of the haunted forest, and she was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. As she left the cabin, the fog seemed to close in around her, the whispering voices growing fainter but never truly disappearing. Emily felt a sense of urgency. She needed to uncover the truth before the forest's dark secrets consumed her completely. Chapter 3: The Search for Answers. The night was eerily quiet as Emily Carter ventured back into the haunted forest, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the thickening fog. The chilling air clung to her skin, and the mist seemed to have a life of its own, swirling and shifting as if guiding her toward an unknown destination. The forest was silent except for the occasional snap of a twig underfoot and the distant rustle of leaves. Determined to uncover the truth about her family's connection to the forest, Emily retraced her steps to the old cabin. The forest was denser than she remembered, the trees pressing closer together, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Her flashlight illuminated the path ahead, but the shadows seemed to stretch and grow, creating a labyrinth of darkness. As she approached the cabin, Emily noticed something different. The once battered structure seemed to be in slightly better condition, as though it had been restored. The door was now firmly shut, and the broken windows had been replaced with clean glass. She hesitated, unsure if what she was seeing was real or a trick of the fog. With a deep breath, Emily pushed open the door, which creaked open with an eerie groan. The interior was unchanged, dusty and filled with the remnants of a forgotten time. The old mirror still stood in the corner, its cracked surface reflecting the dim light of her flashlight. She approached the mirror cautiously, her heart pounding. The shadowy figure from her previous visit was gone, but the whispers had returned, echoing through the room with a sense of urgency. The glow from the mirror was faint but present, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. Emily decided to investigate the mirror more closely. She noticed that the reflections seemed to move independently of her own actions, creating unsettling distortions. Her eyes were drawn to a faint inscription etched into the frame of the mirror, barely visible through the grime and dust. She wiped away the dirt, revealing a series of cryptic symbols and words that she couldn't immediately decipher. Determined to understand their meaning, Emily took out her notebook and began sketching the inscription. She hoped that by analyzing the symbols, she might uncover some clue about the forest's sinister nature. As she worked, the temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers grew louder, their urgency increasing. Suddenly, the mirror's surface shimmered, and Emily's reflection began to warp and distort. The familiar image of herself became grotesque, the shadows around her merging into a swirling vortex. Emily stumbled back, her heart racing. The whispers reached a crescendo, and the room seemed to spin around her. In a moment of panic, Emily turned away from the mirror and looked around the cabin for anything that might provide answers. Her gaze fell upon a weathered journal lying on a dusty table. The journal's cover was embossed with an intricate design, and it looked remarkably old. Emily picked up the journal, her hands trembling. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. She carefully turned the pages, searching for anything that might explain the forest's mysterious presence. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan Carter, one of her great-grandfather's ancestors. As Emily read through the entries, she discovered that Jonathan had been deeply involved in occult practices and had conducted experiments in the forest. His notes described strange phenomena, ghostly apparitions, and a dark force that seemed to permeate the woods. One entry stood out. The forest is a conduit to the beyond, feeds on fear and sorrow. The mirror is a gateway, reflecting the deepest fears of those who dare to look. To understand it, one must confront the darkness within. Emily's heart pounded as she read the words. Jonathan's writings suggested that the forest's power was tied to its ability to exploit people's deepest fears and regrets. The mirror, as a gateway, played a crucial role in this dark process. Determined to find out more, Emily continued reading, her mind racing with questions. The journal hinted at a ritual that could break the forest's hold over its victims, a ritual that involved confronting one's deepest fears and making amends with the past. As Emily read about the ritual, she realized that she would need to gather certain items and perform the ritual at the heart of the forest. The items included a piece of silver, a vial of water from the forest stream, and a personal memento from the past. The ritual was complex, requiring both physical and emotional elements. With the information from the journal, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that to free herself and her family from the forest's grasp, She had to complete the ritual. She gathered the items she needed, some from her home and others from the forest, preparing herself for the challenging task ahead. As she left the cabin, the fog seemed to close in even tighter, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. The whispers grew fainter, but their echo lingered in her mind. Emily pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the forest and complete the ritual. The journey through the forest was treacherous, the path obscured by dense fog and tangled undergrowth. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Eventually, Emily reached a clearing deep within the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient tree, its twisted branches stretching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. The tree seemed to radiate a dark energy, and Emily felt a shiver of dread as she approached. She set up the items for the ritual and took a deep breath, steeling herself for the emotional confrontation that lay ahead. The ritual required her to confront her deepest fears and regrets, a task that filled her with apprehension. She closed her eyes and began the incantations from Jonathan's journal, hoping that her resolve would be enough to break the forest's dark hold. As she spoke the words of the ritual, the air around her seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, but Emily forced herself to stay focused. The shadows around the clearing seemed to writhe and twist, reacting to the ritual's energy. When the ritual was complete, Emily felt a profound sense of exhaustion. The oppressive darkness seemed to lift slightly, and the forest's whispers grew fainter. She knew that the ritual was only the first step in her quest to uncover the truth and free her family from the forest's grip. As she made her way back through the forest, the fog began to clear, and the familiar sounds of the town returned. Emily felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The forest had revealed some of its secrets, but many more remained hidden in the shadows. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. Emily Carter's return to Willows Creek was marked by a heavy silence. The fog that had enveloped the town seemed to have lifted, but an unsettling stillness replaced it. Her thoughts were consumed by the ritual and the ancient tree in the clearing. The forest had revealed some of its secrets, but many questions remained unanswered. The next morning, Emily's resolve to uncover the full truth about her family's connection to the haunted forest led her to visit the town's historical archives. The old building, a small, brick structure with ivy-clad walls, held a trove of records that might shed light on her ancestors' past. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of old paper and ink. Emily approached the librarian, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with sharp eyes behind her glasses. Mrs. Thompson had been the town's librarian for decades and knew more about Willows Creek's history than anyone. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the weight of her quest. "I need to look up some historical records about my family, specifically Jonathan Carter and the history of the haunted forest." Mrs. Thompson peered over her glasses, curiosity piqued. "Jonathan Carter, you say? That's quite a name in our town's history. What exactly are you looking for?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm trying to understand more about his involvement with the forest and any historical events connected to it." Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly. "We have records in the back room. I'll get the keys. Follow me." Emily followed Mrs. Thompson to a dimly lit room filled with rows of dusty files and ancient documents. Mrs. Thompson unlocked a file cabinet and retrieved a box labeled Carter Family Records. As Emily sifted through the documents, she found letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings detailing the Carter family's history. Many of the documents were faded and yellowed with age, but one letter stood out: a correspondence between Jonathan Carter and a mysterious figure named Eliza Blackwood. The letter was dated from the early 1900s and contained cryptic language about a pact and a promise to uncover a hidden truth. Jonathan's words spoke of a great evil that had been bound within the forest and the need for a powerful artifact to keep it contained. Emily's heart raced as she read the letter. It described a hidden artifact, a pendant, said to hold the key to controlling the dark forces within the forest. According to Jonathan, the pendant had been hidden in a secret location to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. Determined to find the pendant, Emily returned to the cabin in the forest with renewed purpose. The knowledge of the artifact provided a new direction for her investigation. She hoped that finding the pendant would give her the answers she sought and help her understand the full extent of the forest's influence. As she approached the cabin, the fog began to roll in once again, wrapping around her like a shroud. The familiar sense of dread returned, but Emily pushed forward, her focus on the task at hand. She entered the cabin, the door creaking open with its usual groan. The cabin seemed unchanged from her previous visits. The old mirror still stood in the corner, its cracked surface reflecting the dim light of her flashlight. Emily decided to search the cabin more thoroughly, focusing on areas she had previously overlooked. She began with the fireplace, which was lined with soot and cobwebs. Behind the old logs, she discovered a hidden compartment. Inside, she found a small, ornate box covered in intricate designs. The box was locked, but Emily's heart leaped as she noticed a small key hanging on a hook nearby. With trembling hands, Emily unlocked the box. Inside, she found an assortment of old papers, maps, and a small pendant encased in a velvet pouch. The pendant was ornate, with a large, dark gemstone set in its center. The design matched the description from Jonathan's letter, and Emily's excitement grew. As she examined the pendant, she felt a sudden rush of cold air, and the whispers returned, more urgent than ever. The shadows in the cabin seemed to move and shift, reacting to the presence of the artifact. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The pendant felt heavy in her hand, and Emily could sense a powerful energy emanating from it. She knew she had to take it back to the historical archives and see if it could provide more clues about its purpose and the dark forces bound within the forest. On her way back to town, the fog grew thicker, and the forest seemed to close in around her. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with disjointed phrases and half-formed thoughts. Emily's anxiety mounted as she navigated through the oppressive fog, the weight of the pendant a constant reminder of the danger she faced. When she finally arrived at the historical archives, Mrs. Thompson was waiting for her. Emily presented the pendant and the documents she had found, hoping they would provide more information. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened as she examined the pendant. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I've heard of such artifacts but never seen one myself. We'll need to consult with the town historian for further insight." The town historian, Mr. Davidson, arrived shortly after. He was an elderly man with a deep knowledge of Willows Creek's lore and history. As he examined the pendant, he nodded thoughtfully. "This pendant is indeed significant," Mr. Davidson said. "It's said to be a key to controlling the dark forces within the forest." Jonathan Carter's writings and the correspondence with Eliza Blackwood suggest that the artifact was meant to be used to protect the town from these malevolent forces. Emily's heart raced with anticipation. "What do I need to do with the pendant?" Mr. Davidson studied the pendant closely. According to the old texts, the pendant must be placed at a specific location within the forest, where it can neutralize the dark energy. The exact location is mentioned in one of Jonathan's maps. We need to find that map and determine the precise location. With this new information, Emily felt a surge of determination. She knew that finding and placing the pendant would be a crucial step in uncovering the forest's dark secrets and protecting her family. The quest was far from over, and the journey ahead promised to be even more perilous. Chapter 5: The Hidden Map. Emily's determination to uncover the forest's secrets intensified as she left the historical archives. The pendant, a key to controlling the dark forces, had given her a new sense of purpose. She knew that locating the hidden map mentioned in Jonathan Carter's records was crucial to understanding where to place the pendant. Her first stop was the cabin in the haunted forest. She felt a mix of dread and anticipation as she drove through the foggy landscape, the morning light struggling to pierce through the dense mist. The forest seemed more foreboding than ever, its dark trees looming like silent sentinels. Arriving at the cabin, Emily was struck by how much the environment had changed. The fog had thickened, and the trees appeared to be pressing in closer, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead. She steeled herself as she approached the cabin, the familiar creak of the door adding to the sense of unease. Inside, the cabin was just as she had left it, but the air was charged with a palpable tension. Emily set about searching for the hidden map. She revisited the areas she had previously explored, carefully examining every nook and cranny. The cabin seemed to respond to her presence, the whispers growing louder, almost as if urging her to find what she sought. She focused on the area behind the fireplace where she had found the ornate box. Could there be more hidden compartments? Emily tapped and prodded, searching for any sign of a concealed space. After a few moments of fruitless searching, her hand brushed against a loose floorboard. With renewed hope, Emily pried up the floorboard and found a small, dusty compartment underneath. Inside was an old leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a faded emblem that matched the design on the pendant. Her heart raced as she carefully opened the journal, revealing a collection of maps and sketches. The journal contained several maps, each annotated with cryptic notes and symbols. One map in particular caught her attention. It depicted the forest with a detailed layout, marking a specific location with an intricate symbol. Emily's excitement grew as she realized that this could be the map referenced in Jonathan's writings. She spread the map out on the table, studying it closely. The symbol on the map corresponded to the pendant's design, and Emily felt a sense of confirmation. The map indicated that the key location was deep within the forest, at the base of an ancient oak tree marked with the same emblem. As she examined the map, Emily noticed that the path to the oak tree was marked with several landmarks: a stone archway, a peculiar rock formation, and a hidden stream. The journey would be challenging, but the map provided clear directions. Determined to follow the map, Emily prepared for her journey into the forest. She gathered supplies, food, water, a compass, and a first aid kit, and made sure she had the pendant and the journal with her. The forest was unpredictable, and she needed to be prepared for any eventuality. As she ventured back into the forest, the fog seemed to lift slightly, but the air remained heavy with an oppressive silence. The forest's shadows were deep, and the path was obscured by dense undergrowth. Emily followed the map's directions, using the landmarks to guide her. The journey was arduous. The stone archway was the first landmark, its weathered stones covered in moss. Emily paused to take a deep breath before continuing. The peculiar rock formation was next, a massive boulder shaped like a twisted face, its surface marked with strange symbols. Despite her fear, Emily pressed on, determined to reach the ancient oak tree. The hidden stream, a gentle trickle of water, provided a brief respite before the final leg of the journey. The map indicated that the oak tree was close. As she approached the oak tree, Emily felt a shiver of anticipation. The tree was massive, its trunk wide and gnarled, its branches stretching high into the sky. The symbol from the map was carved into the tree's trunk, its intricate design glowing faintly in the dim light. Emily examined the base of the oak tree, searching for any indication of where to place the pendant. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent. The shadows around her moved and shifted, creating an eerie atmosphere. With careful precision, Emily followed the instructions from Jonathan's journal, placing the pendant at the base of the oak tree. As she did so, a faint, glowing light emanated from the pendant, casting an ethereal glow around the tree. The whispers grew quieter, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly. Emily felt a sense of accomplishment but also a lingering unease. The pendant was in place, but the forest's dark presence was still palpable. She knew that this was only one step in her quest to uncover the full truth about the forest and her family's connection to it. As she made her way back through the forest, Emily was filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The journey had been exhausting, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The map and the pendant had provided crucial answers, but many more questions remained unanswered. Emily's thoughts were consumed by the next steps in her quest. She needed to return to the historical archives and consult with Mr. Davidson and Mrs. Thompson to understand the full significance of the pendant and the ancient oak tree. The forest had revealed some of its secrets, but the true nature of its dark forces was still shrouded in mystery. Chapter 6. The Unseen Enemy. Returning to Willows Creek, Emily Carter felt a sense of urgency. The ancient oak tree and the pendant were only pieces of the puzzle, and she knew that understanding the full extent of the forest's dark influence required further investigation. The town's historical archives, with its collection of records and insights from local experts, would be her next destination. As she entered the archives, the familiar musty smell of old paper and ink welcomed her. Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Davidson were already there, waiting for her with a mixture of anticipation and concern. The pendant and the map had piqued their interest, and they were eager to provide more information. Emily presented the findings, the pendant and the hidden map, hoping they would shed light on the next steps in her quest. Mr. Davidson took the pendant and studied it closely, his expression growing more serious as he examined the artifact. "This pendant is indeed extraordinary," Mr. Davidson said, his voice tinged with reverence. "It's said to have been used by Jonathan Carter to control the dark forces within the forest. However, the exact details of how it works are unclear." Mrs. Thompson, looking through the historical records, added, "The map you found is crucial. It indicates that the pendant was placed at the base of an ancient oak tree, a significant location in the forest. However, there's one more thing that might help us understand its full purpose." She retrieved an old book from the shelf, its cover worn and faded. This book contains records of local legends and accounts of strange occurrences in the forest. It might provide additional context about the pendant and the forest's dark influence. Emily took the book and began to read through its pages. The book contained various accounts of mysterious events and paranormal activities in Willows Creek, including several references to the haunted forest. One entry stood out, a story about a malevolent entity that had been bound within the forest and sought to escape. According to the legend, the entity had been imprisoned centuries ago by a powerful ritual performed by a group of ancient protectors. The ritual involved a series of artifacts, including the pendant, which had been used to contain the entity's power. Over time, the artifacts had been scattered and lost, but the entity's dark presence had remained in the forest. The legend also described a ritual that could be used to strengthen the containment of the entity. The ritual required the participation of a chosen individual who was connected to the forest's dark history. Emily realized that she might be that individual, given her family's connection to Jonathan Carter and the haunted forest. As she read through the book, Emily discovered that the ritual involved several components: placing the pendant at a specific location, performing a series of incantations, and making a personal sacrifice to demonstrate one's commitment to protecting the forest from the entity's influence. Determined to learn more, Emily decided to conduct further research. She visited the town's old cemetery, where many of Willows Creek's early residents were buried. The cemetery was quiet and overgrown, the headstones weathered by time. Emily hoped that the cemetery might provide additional clues about the protectors who had performed the original ritual. She carefully examined the headstones, looking for names or symbols related to the forest and its dark history. One headstone caught her attention, a memorial to Eliza Blackwood, the mysterious figure mentioned in Jonathan Carter's letter. The inscription on the headstone referred to Eliza as a guardian of the forest's secrets, dedicated to protecting the town from the malevolent entity. Emily's curiosity was piqued. Eliza Blackwood had been a key figure in the forest's dark history, and her connection to the original ritual was significant. Emily decided to investigate further, hoping that learning more about Eliza's role could provide additional insights. Back at the historical archives, Emily consulted with Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Davidson about Eliza Blackwood and the original ritual. They uncovered more information from old records, including details about the ritual's participants and their roles in containing the entity. According to the records, Eliza Blackwood had been a powerful practitioner of ancient magic, dedicated to protecting the forest from dark forces. She had been instrumental in the original ritual, using her knowledge and skills to bind the malevolent entity within the forest. Emily realized that understanding Eliza's role was crucial to completing the current ritual and strengthening the containment of the entity. She needed to learn more about Eliza's methods and the specific incantations used in the original ritual. With this new focus, Emily began to gather information about ancient magic and rituals. She consulted old tomes, spoken with local historians, and explored the town's archives. The more she learned, the clearer it became that the forest's dark influence was more powerful than she had initially realized. As she continued her research, Emily felt a growing sense of urgency. The forest's dark presence was not merely a legend. It was a tangible threat that needed to be addressed. The pendant and the ritual were crucial steps, but Emily knew that she needed to be prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily's journey had only just begun, and the true nature of the forest's dark forces remained shrouded in mystery. The artifact, the ritual, and the legacy of Eliza Blackwood were all pieces of a larger puzzle, and Emily was determined to uncover the truth and protect her family and town from the unseen enemy lurking in the haunted forest. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. With the knowledge of Eliza Blackwood's role and the ancient ritual, Emily Carter felt a sense of urgency. The dark forces within the haunted forest were growing stronger, and the time had come to confront the malevolent entity that had long been bound by her ancestors. Armed with the pendant, the journal, and her newfound understanding of the ritual, Emily prepared for the final confrontation. The night was approaching, and the forest seemed to come alive with an eerie energy. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, enveloping the trees in a dense, impenetrable mist. The whispers that had once been faint murmurs were now a cacophony of urgent voices, echoing through the trees. Emily's nerves were on edge, but she knew she had to face the darkness. Emily made her way to the ancient oak tree, the site marked on the map. The pendant, now glowing faintly, was a constant reminder of the gravity of her mission. The ritual required her to place the pendant at the base of the tree, but it was not the only step. The incantations and personal sacrifice were crucial to completing the ritual and reinforcing the containment of the entity. As she approached the oak tree, Emily felt a chilling breeze that carried with it an unsettling sense of foreboding. The whispers grew louder, forming incoherent phrases and sinister warnings. The shadows in the forest seemed to twist and writhe, reacting to her presence. Emily set up her ritual space at the base of the oak tree, carefully laying out the components she had gathered. The pendant was placed in the center, and she began to arrange the symbols and items required for the incantations. The journal provided the instructions for the ritual, and Emily meticulously followed each step, her heart racing with anticipation. The incantations were ancient and complex, requiring precise pronunciation and rhythm. Emily took a deep breath and began reciting the words, her voice trembling but determined. The forest seemed to respond to the ritual, the shadows shifting and the whispers intensifying. As she continued with the incantations, the ground around the oak tree began to tremble. The pendant's glow grew brighter, casting an otherworldly light that illuminated the surrounding darkness. Emily felt a surge of energy as the ritual reached its climax. But the forest was not done yet. A powerful gust of wind swept through the forest, and the malevolent entity made its presence known. The air grew colder, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and flickering like a wraith. The entity's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its voice was a distorted, haunting echo. Emily's fear was palpable, but she stood her ground. The ritual was not just about the pendant. It required her to face the darkness with courage and resolve. She continued reciting the incantations, her voice unwavering despite the growing intensity of the entity's presence. The dark figure advanced toward Emily, its form shifting and distorting with each step. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single, oppressive voice that seemed to drown out all other sounds. Emily's focus remained on the ritual, determined to complete it despite the overwhelming darkness. As the entity drew closer, Emily felt a surge of energy from the pendant. The ancient magic contained within the artifact was powerful, and it began to counteract the entity's influence. The dark figure recoiled, its form flickering and wavering in the face of the pendant's light. The final incantation required a personal sacrifice, a demonstration of Emily's commitment to protecting the forest and her family. With a resolute heart, she made a symbolic gesture, placing a personal item of significance near the pendant. This act was a testament to her dedication and a final step in reinforcing the containment of the entity. The dark figure let out a deafening, anguished cry as the pendant's light intensified. The shadows around the oak tree seemed to writhe and convulse, as if fighting against the ritual's power. Emily continued with the incantations, her voice steady and determined. As the ritual reached its conclusion, the dark figure began to dissolve, its form dissipating into the mist. The whispers gradually faded, replaced by a profound silence. The forest's oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the air grew lighter, as if the weight of the dark presence had been lifted. Exhausted but relieved, Emily completed the final steps of the ritual and withdrew from the oak tree. The pendant's glow dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. The forest, though still shrouded in mist, felt different, less menacing and more serene. As she made her way back through the forest, Emily's thoughts were filled with a mixture of relief and reflection. The confrontation with the malevolent entity had been a harrowing experience, but she had succeeded in reinforcing the containment and protecting her family and town. The journey had been arduous, but Emily's bravery and determination had prevailed. The secrets of the haunted forest had been uncovered, and the dark forces that had once threatened the town were now held in check. The pendant and the ritual had played a crucial role, but Emily knew that the forest's history and its dark influence were still a part of her legacy. Returning to Willow's Creek, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment and a renewed connection to her family's history. The town had been spared from the full extent of the forest's dark powers, and Emily's efforts had made a significant difference. As she walked through the foggy streets of Willow's Creek, Emily knew that the forest's secrets were not fully gone, but they were now under control. The haunted forest had revealed its dark history, but Emily had faced the darkness with courage and emerged victorious. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also brought Emily closer to understanding her family's legacy and the true nature of the forest's dark influence. With the pendant's power and the knowledge gained from the ritual, Emily was prepared to protect Willow's Creek from any future threats and ensure that the forest's dark secrets remained contained. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.